World War I was among the deadliest wars in human history, claiming the lives of more than 40 million soldiers and civilians. For those who fought in the trenches, it was a nightmare. They suffered through sickness, hunger, rats, awful odors, rotting bodies, and above all, the constant awareness that death could come at any second. Today, we're learning what it was truly like to be a World War I trench soldier. But before we begin, be sure to subscribe to the Wanda Discoveries channel and let us know which historic topics you'd like to explore. Now, into the trenches we go. From October 1914 to March 1918, troops from Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and the Ottoman Empire fought inside trenches, networks of muddy, narrow paths about 7 feet deep and 6 feet across, dug into the ground at the front lines. Though the trenches offered protection from bullets and artillery, they also became death traps due to their filthy, sewer-like environments. When you picture World War I trenches, you may think of sloppy ditches, but they were deliberately constructed. Both the Allies and Central Powers created trenches as a way to protect troops from heavy weapons while holding ground. Trenches were built in zigzag and curved shapes, forming corners and paths that gave soldiers better cover and made it harder for enemies to rush in and slaughter everyone. Each type of trench had a different role. Some were rest areas, some were for storing gear, and others were just for dumping waste. While today, people pay for mud wraps at spas in the name of skincare, being stuck in wet trenches during the war could lead to trench foot, a disease that could destroy toes or even feet. The condition was so common that 75,000 British soldiers suffered from it. During the war, soldiers partnered up to check and care for each other's feet daily. Whale oil was applied to help prevent trench foot, which could develop in wet, chilly conditions. The condition was so severe, even modern festival-goers at muddy events like Glastonbury and Leeds have come down with it. Although medical practices were improving during the war, many soldiers still got sick and died. Cold, wet, and dirty trench life didn't help. Lice thrived in the filth and helped spread illnesses like trench fever. Rats were so bold that they would bite sleeping soldiers and steal their food. The trenches were also a perfect setting for the deadly 1918 influenza outbreak. Soldiers had already weakened immune systems from poor nutrition, combat stress, and exposure to chemical weapons, making them vulnerable to the virus. A major turning point came on April 22, 1915, when Germany launched a surprise chlorine gas attack against 2 French colonial units at Ypres, Belgium. The US, which entered the war in 1917, also created and used chemical weapons. Future President Harry Truman led a US artillery group that used poison gas in 1918. Altogether, nearly 100,000 tons of chemical weapons were used in World War I, injuring 500,000 people and killing about 30,000, including 2,000 Americans. These gas attacks terrified troops. It was a new, horrifying form of warfare that could kill or maim anyone nearby, depending on which way the wind blew. Still, soldiers weren't stuck in trenches non-stop for months. Most only stayed between 1 and 7 days at a time, rotating between front lines, reserve, and rest. This rotation helped limit exposure to the worst of trench life and kept morale from collapsing. But rest wasn't always restful. If there weren't enough troops, soldiers would be ordered to extend or repair trenches. On the flip side, some took their time off to visit brothels. By 1918, around 1 million French soldiers had been treated for STIs. Facing death and violence daily, soldiers often developed deep psychological trauma. The pressure and terror of trench warfare led to anxiety and breakdowns. Military doctors called this shell shock, what we now know as PTSD. Many affected troops were sent to recovery homes, but some were tried and even executed for acts like desertion or refusing orders. In fact, 266 British soldiers were executed for desertion, 18 for cowardice, 7 for leaving their posts, 5 for disobeying commands, and 2 for discarding their weapons, all while suffering from undiagnosed trauma. Food in the trenches was bad, but it kept soldiers alive. The British Army employed 300,000 cooks and supply workers to feed the troops. The diet usually included small servings of boiled beef, bacon, vegetables, and bread, though it sometimes took up to 8 days for bread to arrive, and by then, it was hard as a rock. Soldiers adapted to the stale loaves by tearing them up, mixing in ingredients like onions, raisins, and potatoes, and boiling the whole thing in a sandbag. By winter 1916, flour was so scarce that bread was made from ground-dried turnips. The main dish became pea soup with chunks of horse meat. Even though the food was terrible, troops could at least look forward to their alcohol rations, which gave them a bit of courage in the miserable trenches. Despite the constant danger and high death tolls, life in the trenches was often marked by long periods of sheer boredom. It may sound strange, but soldiers spent much of their time just waiting for the next attack or gunfire. Officers worried that idle troops would start causing trouble, so they encouraged creativity to lift spirits. One of the most unique outcomes of trench boredom was the invention of trench magazines. One famous example was the Wipers Times, made by British troops near the Belgian town of Ypres, which they mispronounced as Wipers. Using an abandoned printing press, they made their own magazine to circulate in the trenches. But this wasn't war news. It was full of humor, poems, satire, and dark jokes, like a mix of The Onion and a school newspaper. Though the war was full of tragedy, one moment in 1914 briefly showed the humanity of those fighting it. On Christmas Eve, British and German troops sang carols across no man's land and formed an unofficial truce. Soldiers climbed out of the trenches and met each other between enemy lines, sharing makeshift gifts and greetings. It was surreal to see troops from both sides chatting, swapping souvenirs, and even playing football together. But the peace was short-lived. Fighting resumed the very next day. In the years after, some troops did call for brief ceasefires to collect bodies, but large-scale truces were banned by commanders. One of the more unexpected legacies of World War I was its effect on language. The mix of soldiers from different regions, countries, and backgrounds led to strange new military slang. British troops nicknamed enemy grenades potato mashers and called lightning-fast fighters stormtroopers. The phrase basket case also came from this time, referring to soldiers who had lost limbs and were carried out in basket-shaped stretchers. Even the word cooties was born in 1915, inspired by the lice-infested coot bird. So, would you want to be a trench soldier in the Great War? Let us know in the comments below, and while you're at it, check out more videos from Wanda Discoveries.